There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has no name in most languages, though nearly everyone who has lived long enough in the modern world has felt its weight settle into their chest at some point during a long, quiet night. It is the exhaustion of having explained yourself one too many times. The fatigue of having defended a decision that needed no defense, justified a choice that was yours alone to make, or answered, yet again, to someone whose opinion should have carried no authority over your life in the first place. You lie awake replaying the conversation, wondering if you said too much, wondering if your words sounded desperate, wondering why you felt the need to convince another human being of your own worth. And beneath that specific exhaustion lies a deeper, more corrosive one still. The quiet dread that comes from watching your energy, your time, and your peace of mind slowly drain away into an audience that was never truly invested in your well-being to begin with. If this feeling is familiar to you, if you have ever caught yourself rehearsing justifications in the shower, or drafting a response to a critic in your mind long after the criticism was spoken, then you are not weak, and you are not alone. You are simply a person who has not yet been introduced to one of the oldest and most devastatingly effective psychological weapons ever developed by the human mind. A weapon so quiet that most people mistake it for absence rather than strength. This is not a modern productivity hack. It is not a trick borrowed from a self-help seminar or a viral post, promising you confidence in 5 simple steps. What you are about to learn is a discipline that was forged over 2,000 years ago, in the marble halls of Rome and the sun-scorched porticos of Athens, by men who commanded armies, governed empires, and stared down mortality itself without flinching. These were not theorists locked away in ivory towers, speculating about human nature from a safe distance. They were generals, statesmen, freed slaves who rose to advise emperors, and emperors themselves who bore the crushing weight of governing the known world, while still managing, somehow, to master their own minds. They discovered, through blood, loss, exile, and hard-won experience, that the human tongue, when left undisciplined, becomes one of the greatest sources of self-inflicted suffering a person can endure. And they discovered in turn that silence, strategic, deliberate, unshakable silence, was not a sign of weakness or social failure, but one of the most formidable tools a disciplined mind could wield. What follows is not opinion. It is not motivational fluff, designed to make you feel good for 20 minutes before you close this video and return to the same patterns that have been draining you for years. What follows is a framework, tested across centuries, refined by minds far sharper than the ones offering you comfort on social media today. And it begins with a single uncomfortable truth. Your compulsion to explain yourself is not making people respect you more. It is doing the opposite. Consider for a moment the nature of power as it has always actually functioned, not as it is portrayed in the noisy theater of modern life, where everyone seems to believe that visibility equals value and that the loudest voice in the room must therefore be the most important one. Throughout history, those who held the deepest, most enduring forms of power rarely announced their intentions before acting. They did not host press conferences to explain their reasoning to every skeptic and detractor who demanded an account of their choices. They understood something that most people today have entirely forgotten in an age of constant broadcasting and endless self-narration, which is that every explanation you offer to someone who did not earn the right to receive one is a small transfer of power, a tiny surrender of your own sovereignty over your life. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man alive during his reign, the Emperor of Rome, commander of legions, ruler over more human beings than perhaps anyone in history up to that point, wrote to himself in private, not for an audience, not for applause, but simply to remind his own mind of the truths he needed to survive the crushing pressures of his position. And in those private writings, what we now call meditations, he returned again and again to a singular obsession, the mastery of his own internal world, and a near total indifference to the opinions, judgments, and demands of those around him. He did not write these words because he was cold or unfeeling. He wrote them because he understood. with the clarity that only comes from carrying immense responsibility, that a mind constantly reacting to external noise is a mind that has already lost its footing. This brings us to the very foundation upon which the entire Stoic philosophy is built, a principle so simple to state and so devastatingly difficult to actually practice that most people spend their entire lives paying lip service to it, while violating it every single day. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the most liberating psychological frameworks ever conceived by the human mind. The principle states that everything in existence can be divided into two categories, and only two. In the first category are the things that lie entirely within your control: your judgments, your intentions, your desires, your aversions, and crucially, your own actions and words. In the second category are the things that lie entirely outside your control: other people's opinions of you, their reactions to your choices, the outcomes of events once you have done your part, the praise or blame that others choose to heap upon you, and the ever-shifting tides of public perception. Epictetus, a man who began his life not as an emperor but as a slave, stripped of freedom, dignity, and even the basic right to determine his own physical circumstances, arrived at this exact same truth from the opposite end of the social hierarchy. And this convergence is itself profoundly instructive. Whether you were born into the highest seat of power in the known world or into the lowest rung of human bondage, the same law applies to you with equal, indifferent force. You do not control what others think of you, and any energy spent trying to control it is energy poured into a bottomless well. Now, here is where most people, upon hearing this principle for the first time, nod along in agreement, perhaps even feel a brief surge of clarity, and then return to their lives completely unchanged. They understand the dichotomy of control intellectually, but they have never applied it to the specific, granular, daily habit of over-explaining themselves to people who have not earned that access. Think about how often you offer justification for decisions that require none. A friend asks why you did not attend a gathering, and instead of a simple, calm acknowledgement, you find yourself constructing an elaborate narrative of excuses, almost pleading for their understanding. A colleague questions your approach to a project, and rather than stating your reasoning once, plainly and moving forward, you find yourself circling back to the conversation hours later, still trying to secure their approval. A family member criticizes a choice you made about your own life, your own career, your own relationships, and you spend the following days constructing internal arguments, imagining conversations where you finally say the perfect words that will make them understand and validate you. Each of these moments, small as they may seem in isolation, represents a tiny hemorrhage of your personal sovereignty. You are, in that moment, treating your own peace of mind as something that must be ratified by another person's approval before you are allowed to feel it. And this is precisely the trap that the ancient Stoics identified as one of the primary sources of unnecessary human suffering. The confusion of what belongs to you with what does not. The discipline of strategic silence begins here, in this recognition. It is not about becoming cold, withdrawn, or socially avoidant. It is not a call to isolate yourself from human connection, because the Stoics themselves, particularly Marcus Aurelius, wrote extensively about our duties to others, about justice, community, and the natural bonds of human society. Rather, strategic silence is the disciplined refusal to spend your limited psychological and verbal resources defending, justifying, or explaining yourself to an audience that has not earned the privilege of your reasoning. There is a profound difference between transparency with those who matter, your closest confidants, your genuine partners in life and work, and the compulsive, anxious over-disclosure that so many people default to when faced with even the mildest hint of judgment from strangers, acquaintances, or critics whose opinions carry no real weight in the actual trajectory of their lives. The ancient world understood this distinction with far more clarity than we do today. In an age where social media has trained an entire generation to believe that every decision must be narrated, justified, and defended in real time to an invisible jury of onlookers. Let us turn to a historical example that illustrates this principle with startling precision. When Cato the Younger, the famous Roman statesman renowned for his uncompromising integrity, faced relentless political attacks from his rivals, attacks that questioned his motives, mocked his austere lifestyle, and attempted repeatedly to provoke him into some kind of emotional, reactive outburst that could then be used against him. He did not descend into the arena of public argument to defend his character point by point. He understood, with the instincts of a man who had studied philosophy since youth, that engaging with every accusation would only grant his enemies the reaction they were seeking, the proof they needed that he could be rattled, destabilized, pulled from his center. Instead, Cato continued to act according to his own principles, consistently, quietly, without theatrical displays of self-justification. His silence in the face of provocation was not passivity. It was, in fact, one of the most aggressive psychological postures a person can adopt, because it denied his enemies the single thing they wanted most: evidence that their attacks were landing. This is a pattern you will find repeated throughout history among those who wielded genuine, lasting influence. They understood that the person who feels compelled to respond to every criticism has already revealed something valuable to their opponent, namely, that the opponent's words hold power over them. There is a psychological mechanism at work here that deserves close examination, because understanding the mechanism is what transforms this teaching from an abstract philosophical nicety into a practical tool you can apply starting today. When you explain yourself to someone who is determined to misunderstand you, or who has already decided, before you even opened your mouth, what conclusion they wish to reach about your character or your choices, your explanation does not function as information. It functions as fuel. Critics and provocateurs who operate in bad faith are rarely persuaded by reasoning, because reasoning was never the actual currency of the exchange. What they are seeking, whether consciously or not, is a reaction, a visible sign that their words have penetrated your defenses and disturbed your internal state. Every time you offer a defense to such a person, you confirm that their words carry weight in your world. You teach them, through direct demonstration, that provoking you produces results, and in doing so, you inadvertently train the very behavior you wish would stop. This is precisely why Epictetus taught his students to imagine, quite literally, that another person's insult is like a stone thrown at them that simply misses its mark and falls harmlessly to the ground. The stone only causes harm if you choose to pick it up, examine it, and carry it with you. The initial throw is entirely outside your control. What happens after the stone lands, whether you dwell on it, whether you construct elaborate internal narratives about the person who threw it, whether you spend your evening composing the perfect rebuttal in your mind, that is where your power actually resides. And it is precisely the terrain that the undisciplined mind surrenders without a fight. There is also a quieter, more subtle dimension to this teaching that extends beyond simply refusing to respond to criticism, and it involves the deliberate withholding of your plans, your ambitions, and your progress from the casual observation of others before those plans have reached fruition. The ancient world placed tremendous value on this kind of discretion, understanding intuitively something that modern psychology has since confirmed through careful study: that the act of announcing a goal to others can create a false sense of accomplishment in the mind, a premature satisfaction that actually reduces the motivational drive needed to complete the goal itself. When you tell everyone around you about the business you intend to build, the discipline you intend to adopt, the transformation you intend to undergo, you receive a small hit of social affirmation. In that very moment, congratulations, encouragement, perhaps even admiration. And your mind, in its remarkable capacity for self-deception, can mistake that affirmation for actual progress. The Stoics, along with the broader strategic traditions of the ancient world, understood that true strength accumulates in silence and reveals itself only through results, not through announcements. This is why so many of history's most formidable figures were notoriously private about their intentions until the moment of execution. not because they were secretive by nature or paranoid about betrayal, though certainly political realities of the time made discretion a practical necessity as well, but because they understood a deeper psychological truth, that scarcity of information about yourself preserves your leverage, your independence, and your capacity to act without the weight of external expectation pressing down upon every step you take. Think for a moment about how differently you would move through your own life if you stopped narrating your intentions to an audience before they were ready to be revealed. Imagine the sheer psychological freedom of pursuing a goal, a change in career, a personal transformation, a creative project, without the running commentary of well-meaning friends offering unsolicited opinions, without the subtle pressure of having publicly declared something you now feel obligated to defend or update people on. This is not about deception. It is about sovereignty. It is about recognizing that your journey does not require narration to be valid, and that the energy you would spend explaining your process to curious onlookers is energy far better invested directly into the process itself. The emperor does not announce his next move to the Senate before he has secured it. The general does not reveal his strategy to the enemy before the battle has been won. And you, in your own far smaller but no less significant campaign toward the life you are trying to build, do not owe anyone a preview of your unfinished work. Let us now descend from the level of principle into the level of practice, because understanding a philosophy intellectually and actually living it are two vastly different accomplishments, separated by the long, unglamorous work of daily discipline. The Stoics were never interested in producing clever theorists who could recite doctrine at dinner parties. They were interested in producing what they called the sage, an admittedly rare and perhaps unattainable ideal, but one that nonetheless pointed toward a very real and achievable direction of growth. A person whose internal composure remained stable regardless of external circumstance, not because they had suppressed their emotions or numbed themselves to experience, but because they had trained their judgment so thoroughly that external events simply lost their power to dictate internal states. This training required something that modern culture has grown increasingly allergic to, and that is radical self-discipline, the willingness to conquer the countless small weaknesses that, left unchecked, accumulate into a character incapable of sustaining any serious long-term ambition. Consider the specific nature of self-discipline as the Stoics understood it, because it differs significantly from the popular modern conception, which often reduces discipline to a kind of harsh, punishing willpower exercised through gritted teeth and constant self-criticism. The Stoic view of discipline was far more sophisticated and, frankly, more sustainable. It was rooted in the understanding that every indulgence of a minor weakness, whether that weakness takes the form of an unnecessary outburst of anger, a moment of gossip about another person, an hour lost to mindless distraction when focused work was required, or a small lie told to avoid an uncomfortable truth, functions as a kind of training. Each time you indulge a weakness, you are not simply making an isolated mistake that exists in a vacuum. You are reinforcing a neural and psychological pathway that makes the next indulgence easier, more automatic, more deeply embedded into your default patterns of behavior. Conversely, and this is the encouraging half of the equation, every time you resist a minor weakness, every time you choose the harder but more aligned path, you are strengthening a different pathway entirely, one that compounds over time into what we experience as genuine strength of character. This is why the Stoics placed such enormous emphasis on the seemingly trivial disciplines of daily life. Seneca wrote extensively about the practice of reviewing one's own day each evening, examining honestly where one had succumbed to weakness and where one had exercised genuine self-mastery, not for the purpose of self-flagellation, but for the purpose of calibration, the way a craftsman examines his work at the end of each day to refine his technique for tomorrow. The specific weakness that deserves particular attention in our current age, an age engineered by some of the most sophisticated persuasion technology ever created specifically to fracture human attention into smaller and smaller fragments, is the inability to delay gratification. This is not a new human struggle, of course. The ancients faced their own versions of temptation, distraction, and the pull toward immediate pleasure over long-term benefit. But rarely in human history has an entire civilization constructed such an elaborate architecture specifically designed to exploit this particular weakness at scale. Every notification, every infinite scroll, every algorithmically optimized feed is engineered by teams of extraordinarily talented people whose explicit professional goal is to capture and monetize your attention by triggering exactly the kind of impulsive, reward-seeking behavior that the Stoics identified as the primary obstacle to a well-ordered life. Marcus Aurelius did not have a smartphone buzzing in his pocket, but he understood the underlying mechanism with startling precision when he wrote about the danger of being pulled and jerked about by every passing impulse and appearance, rather than governing oneself through reasoned judgment. He described the undisciplined mind as one that is like a puppet, dancing on strings pulled by external stimuli, never truly the author of its own movements. The disciplined mind, by contrast, is one that has learned to insert a deliberate pause between stimulus and response, a gap in which genuine choice becomes possible. This capacity for delayed gratification is inseparable from the concept of unshakable focus, because focus, in its truest sense, is simply the sustained ability to say no to nearly everything, so that you can say yes to the few things that actually matter. The person who has not developed self-discipline experiences every day as a series of reactive choices, pulled first toward this distraction, then toward that minor crisis, then toward some fleeting pleasure that offers immediate relief but contributes nothing to any larger purpose. The person who has cultivated Stoic discipline, by contrast, experiences their days as something closer to a deliberate campaign, each choice evaluated not against the question of what feels good in this immediate moment, but against the question of whether this choice serves the person they are committed to becoming. This is not about suppressing all pleasure or living a life of joyless austerity, a common and rather lazy misreading of Stoic philosophy that the Stoics themselves would have firmly rejected. It is about correctly ordering pleasure beneath purpose, so that momentary satisfactions never hijack the trajectory of a life aimed at something larger and more enduring. We arrive now at a theme that connects directly back to where we began, the discipline of silence, but extends it into perhaps its most demanding application, complete immunity to both criticism and praise. Most people, when they imagine the goal of not caring what others think, focus exclusively on the criticism side of the equation. They imagine a kind of thick-skinned indifference to insults, mockery, and judgment. But the Stoics understood, with characteristic psychological sophistication, that praise is in many ways the more dangerous of the two, precisely because it feels good. And anything that feels good has a natural tendency to capture and redirect our behavior toward chasing more of that feeling, rather than pursuing what is actually good and right. Consider how easily a person's character can be quietly corrupted, not by their enemies, but by their admirers, by the steady accumulation of flattery that gradually reshapes their decisions around the pursuit of continued approval rather than genuine excellence. Marcus Aurelius, despite commanding the adoration of an empire, wrote to himself with striking humility about the emptiness of posthumous fame, reminding himself that even the most celebrated names of history are eventually forgotten, swallowed by the same vast indifference of time that swallows everyone, and that building one's entire sense of self-worth upon the shifting sands of public opinion, whether that opinion runs favorable or hostile, is to build one's house upon a foundation that was never solid to begin with. The practical application of this teaching requires you to locate what the Stoics called your own internal citadel, the fortified inner space of your judgment and character that no external force, no insult, no flattery, no circumstance can breach without your explicit permission. This is perhaps the single most radical claim within the entire Stoic system, and it is worth sitting with its full implications. The Stoics asserted that no one can actually harm your character without your consent. They can harm your body, your reputation in the eyes of certain people, your material circumstances. All of these external things exist outside the citadel and remain vulnerable to the actions of others and the unpredictable turns of fortune. But your character itself, your capacity to act with courage, justice, wisdom, and moderation, remains entirely under your own governance, regardless of what happens to you externally. Epictetus, who had endured actual physical enslavement, the most extreme deprivation of external freedom imaginable, insisted that even in chains, his judgment remained free, and that this freedom of judgment was the only freedom that ultimately mattered. If a man who had been legally owned by another human being could maintain this unshakable inner sovereignty, then the sting of an unkind comment from a stranger online, or the disapproval of a relative who does not understand your choices, becomes almost laughably small by comparison, though we should be honest that arriving at this perspective requires sustained practice rather than a single moment of intellectual understanding. This brings us to perhaps the most profound, and, for many people, the most difficult of all Stoic teachings to genuinely internalize, the practice the Stoics called Amor fati, a Latin phrase meaning the love of one's fate. This is not mere acceptance of adversity, which itself would already represent a significant achievement for most people. It is something considerably more radical, an active embrace of every obstacle, every setback, every apparent misfortune as necessary raw material for the very growth and strength you are trying to cultivate. Marcus Aurelius articulated this principle with remarkable clarity when he observed that the impediment to action advances action, and that what stands in the way becomes the way. This is not a hollow platitude designed to make suffering feel more palatable. It is a genuinely functional psychological reframe that changes the entire relationship a person holds with difficulty itself. Consider the practical difference between a person who views an obstacle as an unwelcome interruption to the life they were supposed to be living, and a person who views that same obstacle as the actual material out of which their character is being forged. The first person experiences every setback as a source of resentment, a reason to feel that life has treated them unfairly, and this resentment corrodes their capacity for clear thinking and effective action at precisely the moment when clarity and effectiveness matter. The second person, holding the exact same external circumstance, experiences the obstacle as an invitation, a specific and personalized challenge, calling forth exactly the strength they need to develop next. This is not merely an abstract philosophical stance, but one demonstrated repeatedly throughout history by individuals who transformed devastating circumstances into the very foundation of their greatest achievements. Consider the discipline required to write Meditations, one of the most enduring works of practical philosophy ever produced, was forged not during a period of comfort and ease, but during years. When Marcus Aurelius faced a devastating plague sweeping through his empire, a lengthy and grueling military campaign against Germanic tribes on the northern frontier, the deaths of multiple children, and the exhausting burden of governing a vast and fractious empire virtually alone, he did not write his private reflections from a position of untroubled leisure. He wrote them from the field, between military engagements, in the exhausted hours when a lesser mind might have simply collapsed under the accumulated weight of grief and responsibility. And it was precisely this crucible of difficulty that produced the clarity and depth we still study 2,000 years later. This pattern repeats throughout the Stoic tradition and beyond it. Difficulty, approached with the right internal orientation, does not merely fail to destroy a well-ordered character. It actively refines it, the way friction and pressure transform ordinary carbon into diamond, a transformation that could never occur under conditions of comfort alone. Bringing these threads together, we can now see the full architecture of the discipline we have been constructing throughout this exploration. A discipline that begins with the simple but demanding practice of withholding unnecessary explanation from those who have not earned it, extends into the strategic scarcity of your plans and ambitions before they reach fruition, deepens into the conquering of your own internal weaknesses through the patient accumulation of small disciplined choices, matures into a genuine immunity to both the sting of criticism and the seduction of praise, and culminates in the radical embrace of every obstacle life presents as necessary material for your own becoming. None of this happens overnight, and anyone who promises you instant transformation through a single video or a single insight is selling you something considerably less durable than what the ancients actually discovered through decades of disciplined practice. But the path itself is clear, tested across the centuries by minds far sharper and lives far harder than most of us will ever face. And it remains available to you starting today, in this very moment, the next time someone demands an explanation you do not owe them, the next time criticism lands and your old habit urges you to defend yourself, the next time an obstacle appears and your first instinct is resentment rather than recognition of the opportunity concealed within it. The choice, as it always has been, as the Stoics insisted it always would be, remains entirely your own.